Hi, I'm Pete Andresen with Andresen & Associates, and this video I want to discuss long-term returns. We just got some new numbers, the end of 2023 numbers, and they're really worth seeing. Right now, we're full of fear. There's a lot of concern going on about this problem and that problem. But check out these numbers right here. These are the 30-year numbers as of 2023. And there's something really to see here, and that is that this includes two horrible historic debacles, the dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial panic. At one point, the S&P 500 was down 50%, and people were thinking that it would never, ever recover, but boy, did it ever. Now, Ben Carlson over at A Wealth of Common Sense comes up with these numbers, which are the same as the numbers I produced. And that is that basically the S&P 500 did 10%, bonds did 4%, and cash did 2.3% per year. Those are averages. It's a classic risk-return relationship. Now, of course, that's not what these investments did every year. Remember that the S&P 500 actually had a negative decade mixed into this. And remember that bonds in that last decade of this 30-year cycle had essentially a 0% decade. So 30 years is a long time. It covers up a lot of mistakes, but the long-term results are there. So let's get back to this graph. Now, I put Dodge and Cox Stock mutual fund on there to illustrate that some actively managed mutual funds can beat the S&P 500 over the long term. The challenge is that most of these are higher risk than the S&P 500. They basically figured out the magic trick, which is to invest in the S&P 500 but saw the bottom off. The problem with that is they tend to decline catastrophically during those 50% down years, and the result is they get sold a lot. So it can really be hairy. If you want to buy more of that, of course, that's where your courage comes in. And so these returns were actually beaten over 30 years by people who invested when things were down, and that's hard. Now, why invest in bonds at all? And the answer is because we have to have something to buy with during the down times. So patience pays off. Sometimes patience takes a decade, but look at the results. It's awesome wealth building. Now, the other strange thing about this is that 10% is about what the stock market has done for the last 200 years. So it hits the average. And that's really something to think about, 10% a year. But boy, it will not do 10% a year like clockwork. It can be extremely variable. Now, also consider what Vanguard Wellesley did. That's 40% stock and 60% bonds. And 60% bonds in the last decade was basically just dead weight. But boy, did Vanguard Wellesley add value compared to owning bonds. I have no idea if this performance can be repeated, but diversification paid off in the last 30 years, and it has paid off for the last 200 years. Now, check out this new graph. This is really interesting. This is small stocks compared to the S&P 500. Small stocks outperformed like they have historically. Just amazing. Small stocks are relatively quite undervalued right now and have underperformed for at least 5 years. Nobody's looking at them right now. If you ask somebody, how's your small stocks doing? They'll say, why bother? And yet small stocks have outperformed over the last 30 years and over the longer term as well. How about gold? Check out this graph. Historically, gold makes sense as an investment if you're willing to sell it on the high. Now, tell me, what's the high? And the answer is, I don't know. There's another trend sneaking through all these graphs that I'm showing you, that I'm flashing in front of your face, and that is that valuation really does matter. All investments, gold, bonds, equities, tend to go, small stocks, large stocks, tend to go in surges, and that is they start undervalued, they end overvalued, and then either through a decline or through going sideways, they end up undervalued again. So what does that tell you? That it's probably wiser to not buy overvalued investments. It tells you that the classic methodologies of valuing investments is still relevant. It's still, at least it worked in the last 30 years. That's a major thing. Think about that, because that means that patience over years will pay off. Now, think about all the chaos of the last 30 years. Remember, we had 2008, we had the dot-com bust, we had wars, big wars, we had all kinds of shenanigans and chaos, and we still saw the financial markets produce essentially what are their averages. So what's going to happen in the future, I can't say, but boy, history sure gives us a big hint, doesn't it? Now, if history is accurate, we'll all muddle by. Now, one of the things I get, and I'm going to get it on this video, is that I am 70 years old and I won't live 30 years. But the problem is that the same issue of patience still matters. The same issues of valuation still matter. You have to invest for the legacy as well as your own life. So I would argue that number one, you don't want to outlive your wealth, and that's a big feature, because that's very sad when that happens. And the people that tell me, I don't want to live to be 100, well, when they're 100, it's challenging sometimes. If you have heirs, your heirs will thank you for focusing on the next 30 years. And with all the strange things going on out there, who knows how long you're going to live? Who knows how long I'm going to live? And the fourth thing, and this is crucial for me, is that it's a great mental discipline to indicate what's really going on out there and how does it fit into this broad, long path of history. So with that in mind, let's turn off the news, most of which is noise pollution anyway, and focus on real life, like that guy out there with that chopped, some sort of vehicle that he's revving. It's 6 p.m., time to go home. Let's enjoy life. Make every decision with the next 30 years in mind. Blessings.